The studio lights exploded across the stage as thunderous applause echoed through every corner of the theater. The crowd was already standing before Jimmy Fallon even reached center stage. Tonight felt bigger than a normal episode. The energy inside the room was wild, loud, and completely electric. Jimmy stepped out smiling, waving at the audience while the band blasted music behind him. "Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Tonight Show," the audience roared even louder. Jimmy looked around the room, pretending to absorb all the chaos before, finally laughing and saying that this Sunday was Mother's Day. Immediately, the crowd erupted into cheers. Jimmy joked that Americans were expected to spend billions and billions of dollars celebrating moms this year. According to him, Mother's Day had become one of the most expensive holidays in the country. Then he paused dramatically. "And if you combine Mother's Day spending with Father's Day spending," he said while staring directly into the camera, "it's still basically all for moms." The crowd exploded. Jimmy shrugged and pretended to feel bad for dads everywhere. He joked that fathers usually receive things like gas station gift cards, socks, or a last-minute text message saying, "Love you, Dad," while mothers receive flowers, jewelry, expensive dinners, and emotional social media tributes written like Oscar acceptance speeches. The audience could barely stop laughing. Then Fallon moved into one of his favorite styles of comedy, fake greeting cards. He explained that millions of people were currently searching for the perfect Mother's Day card. But not every card idea should actually make it to store shelves. A giant card graphic appeared behind him. The first fake card looked sweet and innocent on the outside, but when Jimmy opened it, the inside message immediately became awkward and uncomfortable. It joked about family arguments happening during airplane trips and included a dramatic line about someone losing it before landing. Jimmy acted horrified while the audience howled. The second card was even stranger. The outside looked heartfelt, but the inside delivered bizarre health advice that made absolutely no sense. Jimmy stared at the camera with fake confusion, while the audience laughed harder and harder. Then came another card, inspired by viral internet trends. Jimmy joked that somehow even the Ice Bucket Challenge had found its way into Mother's Day celebrations years later. The randomness of the joke completely caught the audience off guard. Every new card became more ridiculous than the last. One of them casually admitted forgetting Mother's Day entirely and trying to pass off a random late-night message as a meaningful gift. Another one barely even qualified as a card at all. Jimmy joked that modern families were becoming so disconnected that some people weren't even sure whether they were sending messages to relatives, co-workers, or complete strangers anymore. The crowd loved every second of it. After the fake card segment ended, Fallon shifted toward political comedy. He mentioned recent tensions involving world leaders and the Vatican, joking that certain politicians were now trying desperately to repair damaged relationships before things became even more awkward internationally. Jimmy focused specifically on Marco Rubio being stuck between political loyalty and religious loyalty. He compared Rubio's situation to a child trapped in the middle of divorced parents arguing over custody. Jimmy physically acted out both sides of the imaginary argument. "Come on, little Marco," he joked in a dramatic voice. "Who gives? You treats? Who lets you stay up late?" The audience burst into applause. Then Fallon joked about the strange gifts exchanged during an official Vatican meeting. According to Jimmy, the exchange sounded less like a historic diplomatic encounter and more like two people panic shopping 5 minutes before arriving at a birthday party. Jimmy imagined both men sprinting through a gift shop desperately searching for anything expensive looking enough to appear meaningful. The audience laughed while Fallon continued improvising visual jokes about uncomfortable conversations between politicians and religious leaders. But then the entire mood of the show shifted. Jimmy suddenly introduced a guest described as a mental health expert named Dr. Brainard. The crowd applauded as a nervous-looking man walked onto the stage, smiling awkwardly. At first, everything seemed completely normal. The guest spoke softly and calmly about helping people maintain positivity during stressful times. Jimmy nodded politely, but almost immediately, things started becoming strange. Dr. Brainard randomly asked Jimmy if he had ever gone berry picking while wearing open-toed sandals. Jimmy blinked in confusion. The audience laughed nervously. Then the guest explained that all of his mental health advice had been transformed into songs. Jimmy hesitated before politely asking him to perform one. The man smiled too widely. Music began playing. Soft acoustic guitar filled the studio while Dr. Brainard started singing about how berry picking in open-toed sandals could somehow solve emotional problems. At first, the audience laughed because the song sounded harmlessly weird, but then the lyrics started becoming deeply suspicious. The singer casually referenced scandals, false accusations, crimes, and dangerous situations as though they were completely normal life experiences. Jimmy's facial expressions slowly changed from polite amusement into genuine concern. The audience immediately noticed it. Every line of the song became more chaotic. One moment, the guest was talking about lighting candles and relaxing. The next moment, he was describing gangs, vandalism, and getting violently betrayed during criminal operations. Jimmy interrupted multiple times, trying to understand whether the man was joking or secretly confessing to real crimes live on national television. But Dr. Brainard kept insisting these were simply general life experiences that anyone could relate to. The audience completely lost control, laughing. Then the musical performance somehow became even more insane. The fake therapist launched into a detailed emotional breakdown about joining criminals near a dockside bar late at night after drinking too much whiskey. According to his story, he got tricked into participating in an art theft involving a famous museum. Jimmy stared in disbelief while the audience screamed with laughter. The man passionately described climbing gutters, failing to steal expensive paintings, renting getaway vehicles, and being abandoned by his criminal partners. At one point, he started yelling about a man named Nicky Knuckles. The audience was dying. Dr. Brainard screamed that Nicky had lied about everything and that he still had text messages proving the entire setup. Jimmy looked genuinely terrified. The funniest part was that after every horrifying confession, the singer would immediately return to the cheerful chorus about berry picking in sandals like nothing strange had happened. The contrast made the sketch unforgettable. The audience clapped along while the fake therapist essentially turned the performance into a one-man crime documentary disguised as self-help music. Eventually, Jimmy tried ending the segment politely. But as the guest walked away, he suddenly ran back toward the stage, whispering desperately for Jimmy not to tell anyone he had seen him. The crowd exploded again. Jimmy reminded him that he had literally confessed to crimes on national television in front of millions of viewers. The fake therapist panicked. Then the sketch escalated into another absurd moment where Jimmy joked about tracking him down at a berry farm. The audience laughed as both characters argued like children while pretending the situation was completely serious. Finally, the segment ended with the audience singing the bizarre berry-picking chorus together, while Jimmy danced around the stage, laughing uncontrollably. It instantly became one of the strangest comedy moments of the night. After the chaos finally settled down, Fallon returned to quick headline jokes. He mentioned a lawsuit involving an Italian food manufacturer accused of using fake tomatoes. Jimmy joked that in New Jersey, tomato fraud was treated with the same seriousness as organized crime. The audience laughed loudly while Fallon pretended. Ketchup companies everywhere were now hiding from investigators. Then he joked about newly released Star Wars-themed body sprays and lotions. Jimmy imagined people walking around smelling like sweaty Wookiees after using them. The crowd loved it. After the monologue wrapped up, Fallon began introducing the celebrity guests appearing on the show. He hyped up legendary Rolling Stones guitarist Ronnie Wood, calling him one of the greatest rock musicians of all time. Jimmy acted like an excited fanboy while talking about the Rolling Stones' upcoming music release. The audience erupted when Ronnie's name was announced. Then Fallon introduced actress Molly Gordon and praised her new movie. After that, he welcomed actor Daniel Day Kim, complimenting both his acting career and his global travel series. Finally, Jimmy announced the night's musical guest, Kim Petras, sending the audience into another wave of cheers. But the biggest production piece of the entire episode was still ahead. Jimmy transitioned into a massive comedy segment involving Formula One racing, Ford vehicles, celebrity drivers, and complete chaos. The screen switched to cinematic footage from the Miami Grand Prix. Jimmy stood near the racetrack wearing racing gear while engines roared around him. The atmosphere looked absolutely insane. Cars screamed across the track at terrifying speeds, while giant crowds filled the stadium. Jimmy looked both excited and terrified. He admitted that it was his first Formula One experience, and joked that his internal organs were no longer positioned correctly after riding inside one of the race cars. Then Fallon met Formula One stars Max Verstappen and Isaac Hadjar. Jimmy immediately started making terrible puns about Verstappen's name. The drivers laughed awkwardly while Jimmy continued acting like an overexcited child meeting superheroes. He asked them how they mentally prepared for races involving impossible speeds and life-threatening danger. One of the drivers casually answered that they were preparing by doing interviews with Jimmy. The audience laughed. Suddenly, an engineer interrupted the conversation and began aggressively promoting technical information about Ford racing engines. Jimmy tried continuing the interview several times, but the engineer kept hijacking the conversation with increasingly detailed facts about horsepower, performance systems, and automotive engineering. The comedy came from Jimmy looking trapped inside what felt like a corporate presentation disguised as entertainment. Then Fallon revealed that he also wanted to attend the Kentucky Derby during the same weekend. He jokingly asked how quickly an F1 car could drive him there. That was when the sketch transformed into a full road trip adventure. Jimmy was introduced to a massive Ford off-road truck designed for extreme terrain. The engineer insisted it was the perfect vehicle for the mission. Before Jimmy could protest, he was dragged into the truck and forced into an absurd high-speed road trip. The sequence became increasingly cinematic. Massive tires tore through dirt roads while dramatic music blasted in the background. Jimmy screamed constantly while the engineer calmly explained technical specifications about engines, suspension systems, and horsepower. Every time Jimmy reacted emotionally, the engineer responded with another overly serious car fact. The contrast made the entire segment hilarious. Jimmy kept trying to enjoy the adventure while simultaneously looking terrified for his life. At one point, the truck launched across rough terrain while Fallon screamed so loudly that even the engineer briefly looked concerned. The audience back in the studio could barely breathe from laughing. Eventually, the pair arrived at Churchill Downs completely exhausted. Jimmy stepped out of the vehicle expecting the Kentucky Derby to begin immediately. Instead, he discovered they had arrived an entire day too early. The engineer looked disappointed. Jimmy looked emotionally broken. Then the engineer suggested an even crazier idea, driving back to Miami in another performance vehicle. Jimmy assumed he meant riding horses. Instead, the engineer introduced a high-powered Mustang. Engines roared again. More cinematic music exploded through the speakers. What followed looked less like a comedy sketch and more like the trailer for a giant Hollywood action movie. Cars drifted through roads at insane speeds, while Jimmy screamed and laughed simultaneously. The visuals became increasingly ridiculous with dramatic close-ups, tire smoke, fast cuts, and exaggerated reactions. At one point, even horses appeared frightened by the chaos. By the end of the segment, Jimmy looked completely exhausted. The engineer proudly promoted sweepstakes prizes and future Ford vehicles while Fallon tried recovering emotionally from the experience. The audience inside the studio erupted into applause as the segment finally ended. Jimmy thanked the drivers, the racing teams, Ford, and everyone involved before throwing the show into commercial break. The episode had become an absolutely insane mixture of political jokes, fake crime confessions, bizarre musical comedy, celebrity interviews, racing action, and complete unpredictability. And somehow, despite all the chaos, the audience loved every second of it. By the end of the night, viewers weren't just watching another late-night talk show anymore. They were watching controlled comedy madness unfold live on television. That combination of awkward improvisation, absurd storytelling, celebrity energy, and over-the-top production was exactly what made the episode unforgettable. The crowd remained loud until the very final second as Jimmy Fallon smiled, waved to the audience, and prepared for the next segment of one of the weirdest and funniest nights the show had seen in a long time.